Let's get straight into what's happening in Europe and the UK. Of course, we see policymakers scrambling to respond to higher prices. Gas very much in focus now. Is it fair to call this a crisis?
I think it is. I mean, I think we should say gas markets are, on red alert, to use another phrase that others have used to discuss the climate. And essentially, prices are up 250% since January. On an energy equivalent basis, gas prices are now the most expensive fossil fuel, and it's on par with where gasoline prices were when oil prices were over $100 a barrel. So this is a crisis. It's just plain and simple. And I think what we have to do is really ensure that the climate crisis, which it is a crisis, doesn't turn into an energy crisis. And so the thing I'm most concerned about as it regards to what's going on in Europe now and what I think is going to happen in terms of prices trending higher and volatility over the next couple of years is that it doesn't undermine public support for climate progress. Because once we lose public support, I think that's a very hard thing to gain back.
And just on prices, you think we're going to see higher LNG, higher oil, higher commodities broadly into the future as a result?
Yeah, I think so. And it's just not LNG, too. I would put oil into this as well. The IEF did a report with Boston Consulting Group in December of last year that basically looked at the COVID impacts on upstream investment in oil and gas, essentially. And what we found was the CapEx cuts in new investment in new upstream in 2020 were about 35%. This year they're about 30%. We're about to update that report. But 2 years in a row on CapEx cuts in new supplies is essentially going to create a supply crunch and volatility, which if you're a consumer of natural gas, it's terrible. And also higher prices, this is not just natural gas, but oil prices as well. And we're talking like 2 or 3 years' time. So we're not even in that stage yet. We're in a different stage here that results with sort of the immediate impacts of COVID and just ramping up supplies. And so I think we have a couple rough years ahead of us.
Okay, watching that closely. With regards to the situation in the UK, though, policymakers have already said they're not going to be throwing good money after bad. They're not going to be bailing out or backstopping some of these small and large suppliers at risk of collapsing. Is that the right approach?
Well, I'll leave it to the UK government to figure out what they're going to do here. I have to say I am impressed that they're so far in front of the issue and they're not going to be caught by surprise at all in terms of, as we've seen in other places, even in places like Texas, where they're kind of responding constantly. It looks like the UK government is trying to get in front of it, and I think that will bode well, but I do see prices going higher from where they even are now.
And I think the question is how much higher, and at that point, it's anyone's guess.
Yeah.
On the geostrategic angle to this, though, as well, Russia, we know, is a critical supplier to the European markets. Some say Russia is intentionally creating an artificial deficit here in order to fast-track the approval of Nord Stream 2. Is there any credibility to that argument in your view?
Well, from my standpoint, I think that would get them into trouble in terms of that pipeline. I don't think that would apply pressure to get the thing approved, and so I don't necessarily follow that logic. Also, I think we have to keep in mind that there are supply issues and inventory issues in Russia that are also impacting this situation, and it's already very cold in Russia, and will soon, I think, the winter and colder temperatures in Europe, I think, are going to exacerbate the problem.
We're here today to talk about gas, and I know gas is a major focus when you look at the progress on the energy transition. What role do you think gas is going to play in that long march and the path to net zero?
Well, I think it's critical. I mean, it's definitely a bridge fuel. It's something that at the IEF we're talking about in terms of supporting natural gas. It's certainly the lowest carbon fossil fuel, and so it's also a feedstock for different net zero pathways. So, for example, I'm speaking about hydrogen here, and it's a clear contributor to hydrogen pathways in terms of blue hydrogen. And from the IEF standpoint, we're going to need the rainbow colors of hydrogen. We're going to need all types in order to meet our climate goals.
And just finally, a policy question to wrap up. You've just come back from Vienna, so no doubt the Iran nuclear deal is very much on your radar right now. At the same time, Team Biden in the United States coming forward with new targets about when the US is going to be able to decarbonize its own power sector and get the country onto a more cleaner path. What's your view on those Team Biden targets? Are they realistic? And are we going to get a nuclear deal this year?
Well, I just came from the IAEA in Vienna. I wish I could have stayed longer, but it's also critical. It's definitely critical in terms of the nuclear deal, but for oil markets, it's also really important as well. So it's something that I think we need to keep monitoring, and I think things have delayed a little bit with the new government, but I'm not as pessimistic maybe as others would be that we'll get to an agreement there. I think both sides are quite motivated to get there. In terms of what's going on in the U.S., I mean, the Biden administration is aggressively pursuing the energy transition. I have commended what they're doing, in particularly in terms of methane, this global methane pledge that the president talked about, reducing methane by 30% by 2030. We have a methane initiative at the IEF to share methane data and satellite data with member countries. So we're helping on the methane emissions pledge area. But the other area that I really commend the U.S. for is on clean energy R&D. And that's because we're never going to be able to get to where we need to be in terms of meeting our climate goals just with renewables alone. We need to have new technologies, new innovation, and that's going to require government stepping up to the plate. And so what the Biden administration has proposed is quadrupling the clean energy R&D in the U.S., and we're encouraging other governments to do that. Companies are doing a lot of companies here are doing a lot of R&D research, but the most riskiest and innovative, that has to be done by governments, because these companies report to shareholders, so they're not going to be able to chase everything. And a lot of the breakthroughs we've seen in the energy sector have all come from government R&D. Now, it's been perfected by the companies, but governments are really responsible, and we just need to do more on innovation and technology, and that's really where the solution to climate change stands.
Indeed, and having all players on side. Joe, we're out of time. We'll have to leave it there, unfortunately, but great to talk with you today. We appreciate it. That's Joe McMonigle there, the Secretary General of the IEF. Guys, with that, we'll pass it back over to you.